Sunday. It's a great day to serve the Lord. Welcome to Hope Today. We are so glad you've joined us. We've got a great program in store for you. I'm Tom Hollis. I'm here with Sydney Goldman and Amanda Brocker. Sydney, tell us what's coming up.
Hidden in the East Hills, there's a school serving as a beacon of hope for some of the most vulnerable youth in Pittsburgh. For nearly 30 years, Imani Christian Academy has provided quality educational and an emotional support system to students living in and around the underserved community. To talk more about Imani's impact in the story, the Academy's CEO and head of school, Paulo Nzambi, is joining us today. Paulo, we're so grateful to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, we really appreciate all that you're doing to make an impact in the East Hills. And before we get into the story of Imani Christian Academy, can you tell us a little bit about your background and the God story of actually how he brought you to the school?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, my parents are immigrants to the United States. They were from Luanda, Angola, west coast of Africa. My dad was a part-time minister, and during that period in the 70s, you know, being a minister was not something that the government looked favorably upon. So they would imprison my father from time to time, and ultimately they decided, my parents, that they couldn't stay in their native country. They had to flee. And they took me and at the time my 3 other brothers and started traveling the world seeking a place where they could raise their children to live in an environment where they were free to worship the God that they loved, obtain a quality education, and become everything God intended them to be. And ultimately that led us to the United States. Once we arrived here, we really took advantage of every opportunity. God opened doors in amazing ways. I was able to go to undergraduate school. I went to graduate school here. I was a lawyer for 13 years. I was a nonprofit executive. And then at some point, I had an opportunity. I was invited to come and work for Imani Christian Academy. And it was an amazing story. Literally, my job that I had been working ended at 9 a.m. on that morning. And I was sitting there contemplating, like, what does God have in store for me next? What's the next thing that I'm going to do? But you know, when a job ends, you're sort of at, you don't know. You're asking all these questions, or more questions than there are answers. And at 2 p.m. on the same day, I received a call, and it was from the head of the board, the chair of the board, inviting me to come and take a look at Imani Christian Academy. They said, we heard you might be available, and you know, we wanted to get to you before anybody else would. And so that really began the journey that was a relatively short one that led me to Imani. Yeah.
Wait a minute, Sid. They heard at 2 o'clock. You had been laid off at 9 o'clock and hadn't told anybody, right? And boy, Pittsburgh's a big, small town, isn't it?
It is.
Word gets around fast.
It is. It happened so fast. I remember taking the call and thinking, I haven't even told my wife yet. You know, like she hasn't received the news. So it was clearly a God moment. You know, for me, it was God definitively directing me to my next assignment. And that's how I've always viewed my work at Imani Christian Academy with all the folks there. It is a Christian mission. We are called to do work in that part of the city to serve that population, that community. And that's how we very much pursue the work of education through a Christian mission perspective.
I love it so much that you were called, you're on assignment for Imani Christian Academy. And you know, some people in the city of Pittsburgh have heard of Imani, but for those who don't know the story and the background, really the miracle, can you share the story of Imani?
Yeah, Imani was really birthed out of Bishop Clay's vision of what he wanted to do at a critical time in the early 1990s. As some people know, in the 1990s, the African American community was really struggling. There was a great deal of violence, drug proliferation, gangs, and many young lives were simply being lost. Innocent lives were being lost. And Bishop Clay at that time found himself burying a lot of young men. And he was convicted. He realized through the Holy Spirit that he was encountering these young lives too late, at a point where he was no longer able to share the gospel truth with them, right, to impact their lives in a meaningful way. And he was given this vision of a school literally designed to save lives, to intervene in the lives of children where they weren't necessarily going to school, they weren't doing well in school, but a school that would first and foremost love them and allow them to understand that God loved them. And in so doing, bring them back to life and lead them into a new future, one that was filled with hope, one that was filled with brightness, one that was dramatically different in many instances from the one that they had been experiencing before. And that really birthed Imani Christian Academy, a school where, you could come in and you would recognize people from your own community. You would recognize, they would know and understand your story, so you didn't have to explain. There were people there who loved God and were unabashed about making sure that you knew as a student that God loved you, had a purpose and a plan for your life, and it was their reason for being there to help guide you on that purpose walk. And so Imani really began from those humble beginnings, and it grew and grew, and ultimately it's in a school now in the East Hills, and we attract many, many more students than we did before. Eventually, Imani had this reputation for being compassionate, kind, caring, and nurturing. But we also developed a sort of brand of education that really appealed to people because it was Christian-based, right? And people said, that's what I want for my child. And so more and more people began to bring their students to Imani Christian Academy, not necessarily because they were struggling in school, but because Imani was a better fit for their value system. Imani was offering things that they weren't getting in other places. They felt at home at Imani. And so ultimately it grew to the school that it is now. We have about 150 students currently, and we're there in the East Hills serving the same community of folks. Yeah.
It's so incredible. And Imani, it means faith in Swahili, which is really powerful. And so, Paulo, can you just talk to us a little bit about some of the testimonies that you've seen? Because I don't think a lot of people understand. If you've ever driven through the East Hills of Pittsburgh, my goodness, it's just like the impoverishment. There's single moms. There's so much going on. Can you just talk about the climate of the school, what the students are carrying and dealing with, and the miracles that you have seen God just moving in the midst and despite of their circumstances, how education is helping to elevate them and guide them on a brighter path?
Absolutely. Well, it's difficult at times to drive through the community, and oftentimes, there are areas where you see dilapidated homes, boarded up, windows, weeds growing in yards. There's definitively areas and pockets of Pittsburgh where the economic revitalization that has touched many other communities has not touched these communities. And you realize that it's more than just the vision of these homes in disrepair. It's more than just broken sidewalks. It's broken dreams and failed promises, right? It's the reality that young people are going to grow up in an environment that suggests to them that there's a real limit on their God-given capacity, right? That their dreams are being diminished by an environment that suggests that there's not that much available to them. And then you realize that that's why we're there. That's why Imani has been situated and strategically placed where it is. We are adjacent to a subsidized housing development. We are in a community that has been historically underserved. And I say historically because it's more than just a generation. Like, it's been generations that the same groups of people have been in this community struggling to survive. And Imani really represents a beacon of hope. I have seen so many people come to Imani. And, now we've been there almost 30 years. So we've got parents whose children now come to Imani. We've had grandparents who taught at Imani, whose grandchildren come to Imani. So it's extraordinary to see how God has been working transgenerationally. And the stories that you hear of young people who came to Imani who, in their former schools, they were branded as troubled children or problem children, children who couldn't learn, who didn't have capacity. And they came to Imani and they were introduced to people who said, that is not how God sees you. God sees you as fearfully and wonderfully made. God sees you as imbued with purpose. God has given you capacity, and that's what we're going to speak to. And see the transformation in these children. See them come to believe in themselves and understand that how God sees them is how they should see themselves. And what it does to transform not only their academic capacity, but their view of what's possible in the world, right? To realize that there's a world beyond their neighborhood. There are opportunities beyond what they've seen. And knowing that Imani has been strategically placed in such a position to help guide them along that way. Young people who came and literally, there's a story of a young man who, thanks to, some of our sports teams, they really wrap around, young men and women who play sports. And literally, the story goes that the first day that he went to football practice, one of his best friends was shot. And, upon graduation, one of the mothers would come to the coach who was instrumental in getting him engaged in the sports and said to him, you know, you changed, you saved my son's life. And his understanding was like, you know, we collectively have helped. And she says, no, you don't understand. If he hadn't been at practice that day, he probably would have been standing right next to his friend who lost his life. So the way God intervenes through what is available in a school, whether it be athletics, whether it be, you know, academic programs, whether it be enrichment opportunities, is extraordinary, is extraordinary. So being a school that serves the underserved, you know, our greatest desire is, number one, to impart the love of God and the gospel truth to our children, right? Number two, to equip them educationally for life that exists beyond Imani Christian Academy. And number three, to make sure that we equip them to spread the good news themselves, to let other people know what God has done for them through Imani Christian Academy.
It's truly incredible, Paulo, hearing just the story and the testimony of what God is doing in the midst of the darkness. There's a beacon of hope, a beacon of light, and it's Imani Christian Academy. I know we just have like 10 seconds left. Is there anything that you specifically need prayer for your school? We know it's like summertime right now. The school years are quickly approaching. So what can we as a family pray for you?
We need prayer for resources. You know, doing this work is one that constantly requires, you know, every year we begin the year and we are challenged in our faith walk. We say, do we have enough to make it through? And we raise the money every year. Although we charge a modest tuition, really, we raise the money to keep the school going. So prayers for resources, so that we don't have to continue to brag about doing so much with so little for students who need so much more, is what we really need. Yeah, that would be wonderfully helpful. Yeah.
Well, Paulo, thank you so much for sharing the story, the miracles of Imani Christian Academy, and thank you for all that you're doing and your whole teachers and your staff and everyone that is truly making an impact on students' lives. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we'll be right back in about a minute, and we're going to speak to your spirit and encourage your heart. We'll be right back.
Can you imagine tens of thousands of people from all across this city coming together simply to pray? Every generation has an opportunity to witness the goodness of God filling their city. Our generation right now is desperate for something good. We're desperate for unity. We want everyone to have the opportunity to witness God, to witness His glory being made real amongst us.
I know you're blessed. I've been blessed sitting here learning about Imani, and I just want to ask you, Paulo, a question about identity, because I see these kids, and you know, a lot of our public school systems, they're telling them, you know, you have one of 72. Who are you? But what is different about your school?
Well, we are unabashedly Christian, and we are unapologetically Christian. And what that means is we rest on the Bible. We rest on the truth of God's word and what He says about us. And so what we, you know, convey to our students is that God has made you in a definitive and unique way according to His plan. You know, He is not confused about your identity at all. He knew you, like you said, before you were formed in your mother's womb. He knows every hair upon your head. He has a plan for you. He brought you here to prosper you and not to harm you, right? And so you have to understand that God's plan for you is clear, right? And the best place that you can be in is in the center of His will, right? And that means identifying yourself as God's child. And the world around you will tell you that you're a million different things. God knows who you are. And if you know God, what's most important is understanding how He defines you as His child. Yeah.
Praise God. All I can say is, I know there's grandparents and parents out there, and they're like, how do we find out about your school? Like, what would be their best avenue?
ImaniChristianAcademy.org is our website. You can always call 412-731-7982. That's the number to the school. We are a unique school in some sense. We have an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school all in one building. And so if you're looking for a school to serve your educational needs for your children, we're there. We're there.
And what about if there's people that would like to donate to your school? I'm sure we bring on those funds. We
Absolutely,
want to help these
absolutely.
kids.
On our website, on the very first page, there's a donate button, and you can always call the school and reach out to our development director, Barbara Nicholas. She's there. And you know, in whatever way you want to help, we'll be more than willing to accept the assistance.
Amen.
We will have links to those websites and phone numbers. We'll put all that on a link on our website at ctvn.org. And Sid, I just think that this is what we're talking about: God's plan, God's purpose, God's identity in us as we really are.
It's time for us to step out of ourselves and to help one another. I know before the break we said, hey, we're going to speak to your spirit, but guess what we are? We're speaking the spirit of your generation and of your legacy of children. There are children here in our area that desperately need us. So for today, I just encourage you just to seek God and say, how can I help? How can I be part of the solution? Giving to Imani Christian Academy, loving on the children and the grandchildren, the young people that are in your neighborhoods. There's so many things that we can do. They need us now more than ever before.
And expect the unexpected. Paulo did not expect to be in the situation he is, but he followed after God. God led him. God opened doors. God's going to open doors for you that you don't even know. And it says that no man can shut those.
On tomorrow's Hope Today, praising God for His greatness and faithfulness. Worship artist Katie Wyrick shares her story of battling anxiety and depression and how she's now shining the light and love of Jesus with her music. Don't miss tomorrow's Hope Today.
Cornerstone Television wishes to thank all our faithful viewers whose consistent prayers and financial support have made this program possible.